You know, I find myself seeing patience and disappointment going hand in hand with each other quite often. In the past year alone, I've noticed this kind of thing with certain game trailers that tend to give a representation of a product that is not at all what the final version looks like. And there could be reasons for those things happening, but this is why I now take trailers with a grain of salt. In this case, I'm reminded of a certain show that just a few years ago that had a lot of hype surrounding it, but ultimately left me with plenty of unanswered questions and a lot of wasted potential. The show that we will be looking at today is a series that has a special place in my mind as one of the biggest disappointments of 2014, the infamous Pupa. So before we begin, I'd like to go back about 3 years ago when I saw the preview for this anime back in October 2013. I had just been getting out of watching the Higurashi series, and I guess you could say that I was on some kind of horror anime hype at the time. So one day my friend comes along and tells me about this new show that's coming out called Pupa. He sends me the trailer for it, and I was immediately interested in the show, but was also confused by the end of it. The only words that came to mind when I had to describe it were Cannibal little sister. I'll never understand why I thought it was worth the wait, but I was definitely excited. Some months pass and the show finally comes out, and when I realized that I had only seen like 5 minutes of an episode, I knew something was wrong. The next few months would be filled with more disappointing episodes down the line, and overall it turned me off from horror anime to this day. So why was the show so bad? Well, let's get into that right now. The synopsis for Pupa, according to my anime list, is as follows. Abandoned by their abusive parents with only each other to depend on, siblings Utsusu and Yume Hasegawa find themselves led astray by beautiful red butterflies that have appeared in their world. Unbeknownst to them, these crimson-winged heralds trumpet the beginning of a cannibalistic nightmare. A mysterious virus known as Pupa is about to hatch. After succumbing to the full effects of Pupa, Yume undergoes a grotesque metamorphosis into a monstrous creature with an insatiable desire for flesh. Utsusu, on the other hand, is only partially affected, gaining remarkable regenerative powers instead. Reaffirming the resolve to keep the promise he made to himself years ago, Utsusu is willing to sacrifice everything in order to always be there for his precious little sister. Pupa tells the story of a loving brother's desperate struggles to save his sister while protecting the world from her uncontrollable hunger.
大丈夫だ、夢。
Now hearing this, how would you think that this show would play out the events to come? Unfortunately, it doesn't do it so well. The introduction to the series is fairly decent, with only a couple of minor instances that I could nitpick, but for the sake of the review, I'll just say that the plot elements that are introduced later on just barely feel related to everything in the story. They just come one after the other, and it seems like we're supposed to piece everything together from what little they have to show us. That being said, I think that the first 2 episodes do a good job of at least setting up the story in a way that you could sort of get where it's going. To summarize those events really quick, Utsusu and Yume meet with each other after school. He tells her to wait in the park until he's done with something, and while heading there, she is met by the researcher Maria, who warns her about the red butterflies. Missing the entire point of that warning, she's attacked by an infected dog while looking at them, and Utsusu comes to the rescue only to find out that his sister is transformed into a gigantic monster right in front of his eyes. Maria comes back to tell him that the monster is no longer his sister, but throwing all rational sense out of the window, he tries to reason with the creature.
大丈夫だ。夢は大事な妹なんだ。どんな姿でも夢は夢だよ。
残念だったわね、お兄ちゃん。
Good job, Utsusu. What happens next is where the confusing parts come in. The 3rd episode had what I thought was some kind of dream sequence that Yume was in after eating her brother. It turned out that it was actually a moment where he was eaten on a previous occasion. I can only assume that because it was being viewed on a camera, and the most likely reason that she would show up in the 1st episode. So after that, we're back to the scene of the crime, where dead bodies are strewn about, and Yume, who is now a human again, looks around at all the deaths she has caused, while Maria takes Utsusu's body away to take care of him. Now, to talk about Maria for a moment, the only real use that she has in this show is to explain all the things related to the virus. In this case, she tells the newly regenerated Utsusu about him and his sister's abilities. But it feels weird how when she explains the virus to him, he seems to have no idea what she's talking about, when clearly we know he's at least somewhat aware that he's gotten himself eaten before, right? So either he is just feigning ignorance to protect his sister in some way, he didn't know it was the virus that does that to him, he got the virus before this moment, or the story just forgot about that detail altogether. Not to mention, he killed 4 people before she came into the door, so I would also like to know if this virus gives him any other abilities as well. Because the only thing that we're actually aware of is the regeneration. If he has anything else, I would really like to know. Would the story like to tell us? We'll just forget about that little detail until it creeps up later in episode 8. Once episode 4 ends, you start to think that the show is just dragging you along and introducing a bunch of new things without really explaining them, as you'd come to expect at this point. We find out that Yume had been a monster ever since she was born. Maria wants to birth a monster child. A corporation gets involved in trying to find Utsusu and Yume. And Maria has a fully grown monster in her sanctum that looks just like the one from the first 2 episodes. Why? You'll never know by watching the anime. Another thing that doesn't get explained is how the Amari Ishin company found them to begin with. At least we're told their reason for kidnapping them, which is to do experiments for the good of humanity. Whatever that entails, it ends as soon as it began, with Yume breaking free and killing everyone.
The fuck is that?
What brings everything to a close next is a scene where Yume explains that even though she has killed many people, including those in the facility, that it doesn't matter that she's a monster because she knows that her brother will be there to protect her when things go wrong. Because we all know that justifying a murderous rampage, no matter how severe, always turns out good in the end. What? So what are the good things about this show? It does manage to have some good episodes, believe it or not. When they introduced the mother in episode 5, it made me curious how she goes through a traumatic experience while raising Yume, knowing full well that she is a monster. The paranoid feelings that she has when thinking that she could be killed at any moment were definitely interesting to watch. I just wish that it had been the 30-minute runtime so that I could fully absorb these feelings without them ending so quickly, and as well as with more questions. The iconic 6th episode from the trailer also managed to give me some genuine feelings of discomfort while watching the entire 3 minutes. I was surprised that within such a short time it made me remember why I wanted to see it, and it sucks that the whole show managed to screw that up. Any innuendo aside, the scene itself made me feel almost everything going on with Utsusu. His feelings of helping his sister out while at the same time experiencing an excruciating amount of pain while being devoured. You might get the sense of him knowing what he's doing, while his apprehension to the idea kicks in while he's getting eaten, and it sort of has this effect where those two things are conflicting with each other to the point where he can't make a decision and just gives in to the pain. The art style also looks pretty good, and the music definitely doesn't feel out of place for what little of it there is, and the level of violence, while not the greatest, gets the job done. Definitely not manga tier levels of violence, but it may or may not satisfy your gore appetite if you're looking for that kind of thing. But you're probably better off watching something else for that, though. Now, while I already have made my point about the negative things in this show, I'll try to be a little bit brief here and summarize those things for you. This show leaves a lot of unanswered questions within its own story. It can be vaguely pieced together in some way, but it ultimately leaves you with some holes here and there, as well as things that may allude to other plots within the series, like Maria getting pregnant with a monster child. It never goes anywhere after it's introduced, and we still have no idea about the Amari Ishin company, Utsusu's father, and some other things concerning the virus. We sort of know where their mother ends up after her episode, but it would have been a much better experience if it weren't so damn short. That's another thing. I probably mentioned the runtime of this series a couple of times now, and frankly, it's probably the biggest disservice to this show as a whole. There isn't enough time to tell a story per episode with just 3 minutes, especially one like this where you don't leave with many answers. And to top it off, it's made so much worse when I had to sit through the show week after week just to get to the next episode. And when there were episodes in the series that were going somewhere, the show just ended as fast as it started, and it really annoyed me to no end. It also doesn't give you enough time to have a satisfying conclusion, because if you even get past the first episode, you already know that once you start seeing something that has just a chance of being good, it's over. And speaking of conclusions, episode 12 is just a pointless backstory about how Utsusu got his hair clipped. So I think I just saved you at least 3 minutes of your life if you wanted to watch this. In the end, Pupa is a show that I will forever remember, not only as something that could have exceeded my expectations, but as one of the biggest disappointments I've ever seen, and is just a huge waste of time. And even after what I said, if you still feel like watching it, you won't have to wait 12 weeks for the show to be over. All episodes in one video. I'll put the link down there in the description. I also hear that the manga is way better than the show, and even though I don't like saying it, this one is a special case, and probably the only exception in my personal opinion.